My name is Melissa, I'm 32 years old. And the night they sent me to sleep in my own garage was the last time I allowed my family to treat me like an emotional cushion anyone could fall on, except me. It was a humid night, one of those where the air sticks to your skin as if it too wanted to remind you that you're alone. I was coming home from work, exhausted, my back aching from spending more than 8 hours sitting in front of a screen solving other people's problems. And when I opened the door to my house, the house where I grew up, where I'd once felt protected, I found a scene that seemed like something out of a bad dream. Suitcases everywhere, toys strewn in the hallway, children's clothes hanging from chairs. And my mother with that awkward smile she only used when she knew she was about to tell me something that would hurt me. "Your sister is going to stay with the kids for a while, Melissa," she told me. "You know how bad she's been doing since her husband left her. She has nowhere else to go." I nodded. It wasn't the first time I'd sacrificed something for my sister. In fact, all my life I'd felt my place in the family was the one who gives in. But what I didn't expect was what came next. "So, we thought it would be best if, well, you slept in the garage at least for a few weeks. Just until things settled down." The silence that followed was worse than a scream. No one asked me what I thought. No one thought that maybe, after so many years of carrying everything, I too needed a place where I felt seen, cared for, important. No, for them I was the daughter without children, without drama, without emergencies. The one who could always wait. The one who could always move. And so, with a lump in my throat and eyes burning with helplessness, I carried my things down to the garage. A cold space, smelling of dampness and old paint, with an inflatable mattress that squealed every time I moved. All while my sister slept in my bed, with her kids watching movies on the TV I'd bought. I didn't sleep that night. That night I understood something that hurt more than the hard floor beneath my back. That my presence in that house was never seen as essential. That, to my family, I was useful but never a priority. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever felt like your own family relegated you to the darkest corner, while they decorated the center with someone else? If you were ever made to feel like you were just an emergency option, if you were ever the backup plan in your own home, stay, because this story is for you. And if you've ever slept in a garage, literal or emotional, hit that subscribe button because I promise you your story matters here. For as long as I can remember, I knew that in my family love came with labels, and with a proper name. My younger sister's name, Valeria. I was the daughter who arrived first. The one who learned to walk on her own, to read before the other children in kindergarten, the one who drew with an A and never broke a plate. But that was never enough. Because when Valeria was born, something in the family dynamic changed. As if the spotlight had completely turned and I was permanently in the shadows. My parents weren't bad. They were never cruel. But they were selective. Valeria was the sensitive one, the weak one, the one who needed more attention. I was the mature one, the responsible one, the one who always understood. And that's how, without even realizing it, I became the functional daughter. The one who didn't make a sound. The one who didn't cry. The one who didn't bother anyone. At 6, if Valeria got sick, they would sleep with her. All they left for me was a mint on the nightstand. At 10, if Valeria got an 8, there was ice cream and a celebration. If I got a 10, all they told me was, "Good as always." And how do you explain to a little girl that her excellence doesn't move anyone? That being constant, firm, silent, doesn't elicit applause? I remember that at Christmas, if there were 2 big gifts, one was for Valeria. Mine was almost always something useful. Clothes, textbooks, a new pencil case for school. Things for my future, as Mom would say. "Valeria is still little, let her enjoy it," they would repeat to me year after year. I was a little girl too. A little girl who learned very early that her role was to support without demanding. I grew up learning to be invisible without disappearing. To always be there, ready to help, to solve problems, to keep things simple. While Valeria cried over losing a doll, I cleaned the kitchen without being asked. While she was having meltdowns over not having the latest cell phone, I worked summers to pay for my classes. My mother used to say that I was so mature for my age, as if that were a compliment. But over time I understood that phrase was just an excuse to demand more of me and give me less. And yes, maybe it seems exaggerated. But when the same story repeats itself year after year, celebration after celebration, injustice after injustice, you start to feel like a satellite orbiting a system that revolves around another planet. I never rebelled. I never yelled. I never demanded explanations. Because in my house, being the older sister meant being the one who understood. Always. Everything. But with each passing year, that understanding turned into silent resentment. An anger that had no form, but that accumulated like dust under the rugs. And that one day inevitably would explode. Adolescence gave me no respite. While most of my classmates dreamed of quinceañera trips, school dances, and lazy afternoons at the mall, I divided my time between books, shifts at the neighborhood coffee shop, and my kitchen. At 14, I already knew how to prepare a complete dinner. At 15, I juggled my schedule to go to school in the morning, work in the afternoon, and take care of Valeria at night when my parents had commitments. They never asked me if I could. They simply expected it of me. I was the wild card. The daughter who never said no. The one who was always available. The one who, if the electricity bill needed paying, would go. If the gas ran out, I would find a way to fix it. If Valeria forgot her homework, I would help her until the wee hours. I was the first one up and the last one to go to bed. And no one seemed to notice. At home, my presence had become so obvious that it was no longer considered special. I was like the light on the refrigerator. You only notice it when it's not there. But I was always there. I never complained. I never raised my voice. Every time Mom said, "Melisa, can you take care of the grocery list?" Or Dad threw me a, "Will you help us with this month's payment? You know you're working." I simply said yes. And when my college scholarship wasn't enough to cover all the expenses, I was the one who got up at 5 in the morning to wait tables before school. It was my salary that paid the electricity bills more than once. It was my money that bought the new curtains for the dining room, even though no one at home knew I paid for them. I became the silent support of a family that considered me unbreakable. The cruelest thing wasn't the burden. It was the lack of recognition. The fact that everything I did was assumed to be normal. As if I had been born with a mission I didn't choose, but that I had to fulfill with a perpetual smile. I remember one birthday in particular. I was 19. I was exhausted. That day I worked a double shift because I knew I wouldn't have enough money for gas. When I got home, not a single birthday card, not a single cake. Just Valeria asking me for help with a costume for a school performance. I did it. Of course I did. And the next day when I asked Mom if she'd forgotten, she responded with a simple, "Oh, Melisa, you're too old for that kind of thing, aren't you? Old enough to be celebrated? Old enough to be loved? Old enough to be visible?" I became adept at smiling without enthusiasm. At saying nothing's wrong, while inside my soul was wearing out like a sweater washed 1,000 times. And so I continued. Day after day. Studying, working, contributing. Without complaining. Without openly resenting. Without ceasing to be there. Because a part of me still believed that if I gave enough I would eventually earn a legitimate place. A recognition. Look. A proud phrase. Something. But that day never came. And every time the phone rang it wasn't to ask how I was. It was to ask me for something more. I became the useful daughter. The indispensable sister. And yet I remained the most expendable. It all started with a text message. A simple, "Are you home?" sent by my mother on a random Wednesday afternoon. Nothing unusual, I thought. I was often asked for last-minute things, to pick something up, to run an errand. But when I opened the door and saw Valeria, my younger sister, coming in dragging 3 giant suitcases and 2 sleeping children in her arms, I knew something was very, very wrong. There was no prior explanation. There was no conversation. No warning. I just saw my father unload a box from the car and my mother, in her usual impersonal tone, said, "Your sister and the kids will be staying for a few days. You can sleep in the garage." Just like that. Without looking at me. Without even inviting me to sit down and talk it over. As if it were a decision made in which I wasn't even a factor worthy of consideration. I remember standing in the doorway not knowing whether to laugh or cry. I thought, excuse me, the garage? A space I had organized myself months ago, filled with boxes, old tools, forgotten junk, and accumulated moisture. It didn't even have curtains. No insulation. No bed. I asked if they could at least explain what was going on. Mom just sighed as if my reaction was an unnecessary inconvenience. "Melisa, understand. Valeria comes from a difficult situation. She just separated. She has 2 children. She needs peace, she needs her space. And you, well, you're independent, you know how to handle yourself." I was speechless. Because it wasn't the first time I'd heard that phrase. You know how to handle yourself. They'd used it to justify why I didn't have a graduation party, why I bought my own clothes, why they didn't have time to go to my exhibitions. Because I was the one who knew how to handle myself. It's only temporary, Dad added. A few weeks while Valeria reorganizes. But there was no discomfort, no sorrow, no gratitude on their faces. Only an overwhelming certainty that I would accept it. As I always did. I entered my room for the last time that night, grabbed my pillow, 2 blankets and a flashlight. I saw my sister already settled into my bed, her children sleeping at the foot of it, and her things occupying every corner as if they'd been there for years. She gave me a quick smile. Thank you for giving me the space, Melisa. Really. I'm going through so much. And I didn't know what to say. Because it was my room. My sheets. My books. My things. And it wasn't even a request. It was an order. A reallocation of resources. As if I were a less important piece of furniture. When I went down to the garage and saw the floor covered in oil stains, cobwebs in the corners, and the cold chilling my bones even though it was still autumn, something inside me broke. It wasn't just humiliation. It was a revelation. A brutal, naked certainty that, to my family, I was perfectly replaceable. An inflatable mattress I found in an old box was my bed that night. A half-rusted space heater was my only source of heat. The walls were so thin that I could hear perfectly when someone opened the refrigerator in the kitchen. And every sound reminded me that the heart of the home was no longer mine. Maybe it never was. Kept telling myself. It's only temporary. It's only temporary. But something deep inside me already knew that this temporary would last. Until I was no longer useful. Or until finally I left. And that night, lying on a mattress that was slowly losing air, staring at the unfinished ceiling, without a single word of comfort from anyone, I asked myself a question I'd never allowed myself to ask before. What if this isn't my home? What if it never was? After that cold and humiliating night in the garage, there were no words, no reproaches, no confrontations. On the contrary, a silent flame ignited inside me, a steely determination that didn't need shouting to be heard. I decided I wasn't going to fight with them anymore. I wasn't going to ask permission or beg for a bit of respect or consideration. Because the truth was clear. No one was going to give it to me. So I did the only thing I could. I began to plan my exit. But not a dramatic exit with shouting or cursing, no. My exit would be as it had always been. Discreet, efficient, and silent. While they lived their routine, unaware that their oldest daughter was sleeping in the garage, I focused on building a path for myself, one that didn't depend on their will or approval. The first thing I did was organize my finances. 4 years I had worked several jobs, not counting the overtime that no one paid, and I had saved every peso I could, without indulging in whims or luxuries. I invested in courses, small projects, and even shares in a local company that no one appreciated. It was my best-kept secret. While they argued over who to give what to, I paid the house payments. Yes, those same payments that ensured the roof over our heads remained firm and secure. No one knew that a significant portion of that money came from me, silently, without waiting for applause or recognition. It was my way of maintaining a bond, a last connection with that home that had denied me a decent place to sleep. Little by little, the money I saved allowed me to take the most important step, buying a legal share of the property, becoming a co-owner. A move I made without announcing it, without expecting anyone to congratulate me, because this time I wasn't looking for approval. I was looking for justice, security, and above all, a future where I had a say. At first, it was complicated. Processing paperwork, signing documents, and legal advice. Each step required patience and dedication, but also a firm reminder of why I was doing it. Because I couldn't continue depending on those who relegated me to the garage, on those who used my generosity as an excuse to move. It was time for them to respect me not for what they said, but for what I had achieved with my effort and silence. While my family remained oblivious to my plan, I continued working on my personal projects. I opened a small online store selling crafts and products I designed in my spare time. It was a modest business but my own. With each sale, with each satisfied customer, I felt like I was regaining a bit of the control that had been taken from me. I also started traveling. Not by running away but by exploring new opportunities, learning to value myself and discovering that the world wasn't limited to those walls where I was once told I had no place. Every city, every person I met was a reminder that I could build my own home, not just in a physical place but in life itself. And so, day after day, quietly without confrontation, I created a new reality. One in which Melisa wasn't the daughter who slept in the garage, but the woman who paid monthly payments, who invested, who had her own business, and who, little by little, was becoming the master of her destiny. Silence, far from being my weakness, became my most powerful strategy. Because sometimes the best way to fight isn't with screams or tears, but with patience, intelligence, and the firm conviction that, in the end, justice comes to those who seek it with determination. And even if they didn't know it, even if they continued to ignore my efforts, I knew the truth. I was slowly winning the most important battle. Después de meses de planificación silenciosa, por fin llegó el momento que había esperado con tanta paciencia y determinación. Firmar los papeles que mi harían dueña completa de mi parte en la propiedad familiar. Ese día cuando puse mi firma en los documentos, sentí una mezcla de emociones que no podía explicar con palabras sencillas. Había rabia, sí, por todo lo que me habían hecho pasar, pero también había una paz profunda, porque sabía que ahora tenía en mis manos algo que nadie podría quitarme sin mi permiso. No era solo un papel, era mi victoria personal, mi boleto para dejar tras años de dolor, de humiliations y de sentirse como la menos importante. Firmar esos papeles fue como sellar un pacto conmigo misma, un compromiso de nunca más permitir que nadie me hiciera sentir invisible dentro de mi propia familia. Había invertido tanto en esta propiedad, en esta casa que me vio crecer, y ahora finalmente era mía, o al menos, de una manera legal y definitiva. Pero sabía que esa victoria no se podía celebrar aún, porque la verdadera batalla apenas comenzaba. La salida. Porque ahora, con los documentos en mano, tenía que tomar la decisión más difícil y valiente. Mudarme, dejar tras ese lugar que durante tanto tiempo había sido mi hogar, aunque fuera en un garage frío y olvidado. No fue una decisión impulsiva, ni un acto de rebeldía. Fue la jugada más inteligente que pude planear. No hice ruido. No monté un espectáculo ni dije adiós en voz alta. Me moví con discreción, con esa calma que solo tiene quien ha esperado el momento exacto para actuar. La mudanza fue rápida, pero todo estaba pensado con anticipación. Cada calle que empecé, cada objeto que seleccioné, llevaba consigo un símbolo de mi historia, de mi lucha, pero también de mi renacimiento. No me lev solo mis pertenencias, me lev conmigo la dignidad que durante años me habían tratado de repetir. No dejé espacio para dudas ni explications, porque sabía que no las merecían. Ellos me habían dado un garage para dormir y ahora les daba la espalda, pero con la cabeza en alto, sabiendo que estaba tomando el control de mi vida. Sin embargo, no me fui con las manos vacías ni mucho menos. Dejé algo planeado, un movimiento estratégico que ellos nunca vieron venir. Mientras hacían ruido con sus pelis y sus favoritismos, yo consolidaba mis inversions, aseguraba mis ahorros y fortalecía mis redes. La casa podía ser un lugar, pero yo estaba construyendo mi futuro. En la soledad de mi nuevo espacio, lejos de los murmullos familiares, encontré una libertad que no sabía que necesitaba tanto. Libre de las miradas que me menospreciaban, libre de las órdenes que me relegaban. Finalmente podía ser yo sin conditions, sin justifications. Mirando atrás, sé que mi jugada no fue un acto de abandono, sino de supervivencia. Era la única forma de protegerme y de preservar todo lo que con tanto esfuerzo había construido. Y aunque ahora algunos en la familia no entienden, ni valoran este paso, yo sé que fue la decisión más sabia y valiente que tomé. Porque a veces alejarse no es perder, sino ganar. Ganar el derecho a ser respetada, a ser vista, a ser dueña de mi propio destino. Y mientras ellos viven en el pasado, yo camino hacia adelante, con un plan claro, con fuerzas renovadas y con la certeza de que esto es solo el comienzo de mi verdadero triunfo. I never imagined that the day I decided to leave that house, the place that had rejected me so many times, would become the setting for a twist that no one saw coming, not even myself. I had planned my departure so discreetly, so calmly, that I thought they would simply accept that I had left, that at the end of the day I was the least important, the one who always ended up giving in. But that wasn't the case. It wasn't like that at all. Shortly after moving in, I began receiving unexpected calls and messages, timid at first, then desperate. My parents, my sister, even some distant relatives, appeared at the door of that house that now had a new owner, someone who was neither them nor the brother they had pampered so much. It was me. The real and legal owner, with papers in hand, with every installment paid, with every cent invested, with every signature confirming what for years no one wanted to acknowledge. I remember the day they arrived unannounced, like a swarm seeking to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs, because for them, the house was just a physical space that should belong to the family, but not to just anyone, just to the favorite. They never imagined that this favorite person could lose their throne to me, the one they had always ignored. When I opened the door, I saw them freeze, their faces painted with disbelief and confusion. The atmosphere became tense, dense, as if the air itself refused to accept reality. "How is it possible that you're the owner now?" my sister asked, her voice cracking as if she wanted to convince herself that this was a mistake, a joke in bad taste. My parents could barely look me in the eyes, as if the weight of their silences and their previous decisions were crushing them at that moment. I stood firm, with a calm that belied the whirlwind of emotions I felt inside. I wasn't there to fight or to demand explanations I knew would never come. I was there to remind them, to show them, that I was no longer the invisible person they could use and discard at will. That even though they tried to relegate me to the garage, even though they tried to erase me, I was there, center stage, with the truth in my hands and justice on my side. Chaos broke loose at that moment. The arguments, the veiled accusations, the glances that had previously ignored me now desperately sought some argument to invalidate what I had achieved. But there was no turning back. The papers were signed, the payments made, and my name shone brightly on each document with the strength of someone who never gave up. I remember how my sister, through tears and fury, tried to manipulate the situation, recalling old favors, making empty promises I was no longer willing to hear. My parents, guilt reflected in their eyes, tried to justify the unjustifiable, as if their years of silence could be erased with belated words. But I had already learned the hardest lesson. Actions speak louder than words, and loyalty isn't bought or demanded, it's earned and demonstrated. They had chosen to ignore me, and now they faced the consequences of that choice. That day, as I watched the empire they thought they had crumble before their eyes, I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness for everything we lost, for the years they wasted without seeing or appreciating me, but satisfaction because I had finally taken control of my life and my destiny. The unexpected turn of events wasn't just for them but for me as well. I realized that sometimes, being the replaceable person in a family is just the push you need to prove to yourself that you can be so much more, that you can build your own kingdom far from those who didn't know how to value you. That day I reaffirmed my decision. I wouldn't go back, I wouldn't let anyone else decide for me, much less make me feel less. Because in the end, no matter how many people try to erase you, there will always be a moment when the truth comes out and then everything changes. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Has an unexpected turn of events ever given you the opportunity to rise up and shine brighter? If so, I invite you to stay with me because this story is just beginning and the best is yet to come. When I look back on everything I've experienced and felt, I realize there's something I learned with such profound force that it changed my way of seeing life forever. Dignity is not negotiable, perseverance is not for those who give up, and personal boundaries are the invisible shield we must all learn to raise to protect our well-being and inner peace. It's not always easy to understand, especially when you grow up in an environment where you're made to feel that your worth depends on how much you can give without expecting anything in return, or how much you can endure without complaining so that others can be well. But the truth I learned, and which I want to share with you today, is that no one deserves to live with the feeling that their space, their emotions, and their essence can be trampled on, ignored, or minimized. Life taught me that loving doesn't mean losing yourself. That being strong isn't synonymous with enduring abuse or being invisible to those who should see and value you with respect. That perseverance is admirable only when accompanied by self-love and the ability to say, enough, when we are no longer respected. And above all, that setting boundaries is not a selfish act, but the first step toward an authentic and fulfilling life. I have decided that I will never again allow anyone to tell me where I should sleep, what space I occupy, or what place I deserve in their lives. Because I have learned that I deserve a dignified place, a place of respect, a place where my voice is not a whisper to be ignored, but a truth to be heard and valued. And I know you deserve that too. You deserve to have your time, your effort, and your love acknowledged. You deserve to surround yourself with people who celebrate your presence, who encourage you to grow, and who respect you even in your differences. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's the importance of taking care of yourself, of valuing yourself even when no one else does, and of not being afraid to take firm steps toward your well-being, even if it means distancing yourself from those who don't see you with the love and justice you deserve. It's not easy, I know. It's a path filled with doubt, fear, and loneliness at times, but it's also the path that will lead you to find your true strength, your emotional independence, and your genuine happiness. I want to invite you to reflect on your own space, on how the people around you treat you, on whether they truly value you or are just using you as a wild card, a just in case, or a shadow that disappears when it's not convenient. Don't let anyone diminish you or make you feel less just because you bear their last name, because you are the brother, the sister, the son, or the daughter. You are so much more than that. You are a person with dreams, with the right to peace and unconditional love. Remember that life is too short to live in a place where you feel invisible, where your efforts are ignored and your feelings are minimized. Learn to say no, learn to take care of yourself, learn to leave when you are no longer recognized as you deserve. Because in the end, dignity is the only thing no one can take away from us if we choose to hold on to it with all our hearts. Thank you for listening to my story, for joining me on this journey of pain, learning, and rebirth. If you've ever felt like me, invisible, relegated, used, or simply someone else's choice, I want you to know that you are not alone, and that your worth doesn't depend on the opinions or recognition of others, but on the strength you have to love yourself and defend your place in this world. If this story touched your soul, if it made you reflect, or if you simply need to know that someone understands how you feel, subscribe, share, and above all, remember that you deserve more. You deserve a place where your light shines and your voice is heard. Don't forget that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes the true heroes are us, fighting in silence, steadfast in our values, and brave enough to take the most difficult step, choosing ourselves.